that family photo. And also joining us now to continue on this conversation as we filter through all of these international live looks is going to be Stephen Moore. He is the founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. So, Stephen, I'm going to bring you on right now. Good to have you on
Love
this
it.
morning. Good morning.
Great to see you, Carol. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, thank you. So you just heard the comments from the NATO Secretary General. Obviously, several of these NATO countries are being called on to really bolster up their support to Ukraine. When dissecting some of those talking points and the priorities laid out for today's meeting, what stood out to you and what may be missing?
Yeah, I think there's three really important things that Americans need to pay attention to. And one of the most shocking things for me about the 28-point peace plan was that, Americans have sent tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine to make it the largest military in Europe, largest, most battle-hardened, most powerful military in Europe. And they've held off the Russians for years now. And Vladimir Putin is wanting to dictate what we do with our investment. Vladimir Putin is wanting to dictate what we do with American taxpayer money. And if we limit the size of the Ukrainian government, that makes the Ukrainian military, that makes the world a less safe place. So I think, any references in an upcoming peace agreement to limiting militaries in Europe or Ukraine, I think that would be detrimental to the United States. Putin does not want peace, so anything that he does will be an effort to advance his military goals in Ukraine and Europe.
It's interesting that you say that because in reading some of the reporting from the talks yesterday between U.S. officials and also administration officials in Moscow, it begs the question, especially because no deal was reached and more so they were focused on the framework of that plan as a whole. Why would Russian President Putin have an incentive now to stop that war? It's been going on for almost 4 years.
Yeah, and there are pressures that Putin is facing that he needs to deal with, and he's not there yet. We haven't pushed him hard enough, but he is paying the soldiers that go into Ukraine 10 times what American E1 gets, what an American entry-level soldier gets. And when soldiers die in Ukraine, and there's been about 1.2 million casualties, they get a death benefit that exceeds $100,000, and which is $100,000 in Russia is like $500,000 here. So it's very expensive for him to prosecute this war in terms of people and in terms of the costs associated with making these people fight in Ukraine. So when that gets to a point that that's not sustainable, then I think Putin will be more motivated to work for peace. But right now, the sanctions are working. They're just not working. They just haven't been in place long enough, and they haven't been enforced properly.
Talking about some of the pressures that can be placed on Russia to offer that incentive to end this war, we focus a lot about the United States, but what about these European countries that have really been trying to come up with their own plan, not to just support Ukraine, but to also limit their consumption, let's say, of Russian natural gas in order to stop that funding? But what else can these European countries do that would really take a hit on the progress of this war?
Yeah, so the Europeans have let their defense industrial base atrophy. So they are not able to produce weapons that are as inexpensive as ours, and ours are super expensive, by the way. And but they're not able to produce weapons that are as good as ours. So I think allowing them to buy from our defense manufacturers is a really good thing. And to your point, Belgium is the worst. Belgium buys more natural gas from Russia than it sends money to Ukraine. In addition, Belgium controls about $170 billion worth of frozen Russian assets, and they've done next to nothing with that. They've taxed it. They've taxed it for about $4 billion. They've sent virtually none of it to Ukraine. And so, with friends like Belgium, who needs enemies? And so most of the rest of Europe is kind of getting it right. France and Spain are in similar situations. But you look at Poland. Poland is the second largest army in Europe, and Finland and some of the Baltic states. They're spending more on defense as a percentage of GDP than we are.
Speaking of Brussels, we do have a live look there. That is where that NATO foreign ministers meeting is happening. Stephen, you have an interesting and unique perspective to offer to this entire conversation in the fact that you actually frequently are in Kyiv, Ukraine. So you really see the devastation there on the ground and what this years long war has done just to morale in general. Can you give us a sense of what Ukrainians are feeling at this time as these peace talks? I mean, we remain hopeful, but there's still a long way to go to get to that finish.
Yeah, well, I live in Kiev. I have an apartment in Kiev. I got to Ukraine on day 5 of the war. I just went there to help, and I've been there ever since because there's just a lot to do. And Americans aren't getting the best information about what's going on there. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is telling you what I see and what I know from being in Ukraine during the entire war. And Steve Witkoff is pretty interested in giving away the Russian speaking parts of Ukraine. And I've been to those parts of Ukraine many times. As recently as September, I was in one of the, he talks about these strips of land that, excuse me, that Putin wants. And I was in one of these strips of land. And I just asked people, do you want to be ruled by the Russians? And they said, no. And but what we can give away this land that you're in and have peace. And it really angers them when you say that. I did not make friends by asking those questions, and because the worst things in the world are happening to Ukrainians inside Russian territory. We do a lot of work with Ukraine's Christians who have been tortured and murdered by the Russians for their faith, and we have a movie called "A Faith Under Siege" that just tells the story of these folks, and it's just heartrending, and but also inspirational to see that they get tortured for being an evangelical Christian, yet they continue to praise God and worship as you do, and they run a great risk. So nobody wants the Russians to take more territory.
That is something that we hear not just from Ukrainians, but really the world, the wider world, when it comes to what's going to be the end game, at least for these ceasefire and peace talks. But Stephen Moore, we do appreciate your time here at Live Now from Fox, the founder of the Ukrainian Freedom Project, the Ukraine Freedom Project, excuse me. We hope to connect with you soon. Please take care. And of course, we'll be following these developments. So we'll see, what happens down there in Kyiv and what comes of this in the next several days. Thank you.
Great. Would love to be with you again. Thanks a lot.
Of course. You have a good rest of your day. I do want to turn